Hello world! Welcome back to the CyberSec 101 series. In this video, we will be discussing passwords in cybersecurity. Passwords are a form of authentication that belong to the something you know factor. Password authentication involves presenting a unique user ID, like a username, and verifying it via a password. Upon successful verification, the username determines what the user is authorized to access and what privileges the user has. Passwords are the weakest form of authentication because they can oftentimes be exposed by so many forms of passive and active attacks, such as traffic monitoring and database injection. Over the years, several password protections have been developed to ensure that passwords remain secure and obscure whether they are being inputted into a system or transmitted across a network. One heavily utilized method of password protection is hashing. A hash is a number value that is calculated when input is fed into a particular one-way encryption algorithm, meaning that the input cannot be reverted back to its original plain text once the input has been hashed. This allows a password to be obscured from being able to be decrypted or read in plain text. However, if someone were to run strings through the same algorithm and compare those hash strings to the password hash and one of the strings hashes match the password hash, then the password could still be exposed. Thus, salting was developed to help add more randomness and linked passwords. Salts are random strings that are appended to the plaintext password before it is hashed or encrypted. That way, even weaker passwords have a chance of not being exposed because the longer and more varied a password is, the harder it will be to figure out what the password actually is. That is because not only would a hacker have to account for the password, but they would have to account for the hashes for every possible salt that could be appended to the already unknown password. Salts make it substantially more difficult for someone to expose a password from its hash. Hashing and salting are great, but you would still not want any of your raw hashes or passwords to be exposed when transmitting them across the internet, like for website logins. In this case, encryption is the next best thing because it allows the password or password hash to be even more obscured from possibly being analyzed or decrypted because you don't know who is listening across the wire. Where hashing involved a one-way algorithm, encryption involves a two-way algorithm. The contents of what is transmitted across the internet or a network does need to have the capability of being decrypted on the other side. That way, the data can be used for its intended purposes. Encryption serves to help protect passwords as they travel across client to server and vice versa from being read as raw data or plain text. While there will always be new and consistently updated protections for passwords, there will also always be new and consistently updated hacks for cracking those passwords. Brute forcing is a method of password cracking that involves trying all possible combinations of a character set up to a certain length. The hacker automates trying all possible password combinations in hopes that they will eventually guess one right. Brute forcing is a fairly irrelevant method now because salts and complex password policies have been enforced by a vast majority of people in modern times. And the longer and more varied a password is, the harder it is to brute force. That is because for each and every character added to a password increases the time it would take to brute force that password exponentially. Dictionary attacks involve cracking passwords via a large word list. A word list is comprised of several random passwords line by line, often commonly used ones, where each password in the file is tried against an input. Because hashes and salts are often used, each password in the file must be hashed using each salt value, which could also be stored in a list, and then compared to stored hash values, assuming the hacker is successfully able to extract the stored hash values from a system. Rainbow table attacks are the most efficient form of password cracking. They contain pre-computed tables of hash values for several plaintext string variations and can oftentimes have hash values for all the salts as well. It is efficient because it all comes down to a lookup operation by comparing the hash in question against a hash table. While rainbow tables are the most effective way of cracking password hashes, they can be countered by a large and random enough salt and hash to where the rainbow table just does not have an entry for the corresponding plain text in its table rows. Password guessing is often used against security unaware and/or lazy people who just want a simple password they can remember and type in without any regards to the potential dangers of having a password that is extremely easy to guess. There are lists of commonly used passwords people use on a regular basis that are available, and hackers take advantage of those lists and, more often than not, they eventually break into someone's online account on some website just by guessing. Some hackers will even perform reconnaissance and social engineering to formulate potential passwords for a target user they think may be using a very hackable password. I would like to take a moment from our video to kind of show you what a password cracker would look like. There's a famous password cracker called John the Ripper, and it has a GUI version called Johnny. We're actually going to be using Johnny because it'll be easier to visualize what we're doing with it, right? Now, oftentimes, Johnny is used to crack like password files that are located on the system, and that would be like SAM files on a Windows system, or in a Linux system, that would be shadow files. And oftentimes, you can automatically load the shadow files into Johnny. But if you want to crack the hashes faster, it's better to use the unshadow command, which is provided by the Johnny cracker itself when you install it. And what that basically does is it combines the /etc/passwd and the /etc/shadow file into a proper readable password format for Johnny to crack. Now, John the Ripper can still crack the shadow file without it. It's just, it will take longer. So we're not actually going to load my shadow file in there, but we're going to just do a basic MD5 hash crack on a simple plain text word. Okay. So let's go ahead and echo. Yeah, let's use almond. Okay, and we're actually going to do tack in almond, because if we didn't do tack in, it would actually add a new line onto our string, which would change the hash. Anytime you change the string that you're trying to hash, it changes the whole hash. It's through something called an avalanche effect, which I'll touch on in a later video. But anyways, I'll go ahead and demonstrate what it looks like. So if we just did almond MD5 sum, right, we get that hash, right? And if we remove the tack in, which is our new line remover, right? We get, see, two different hashes. So we want the one without the new line, right? And we're going to go ahead and redirect that output into a hash.txt file, okay? So let's go ahead and make sure our hash is in there. Awesome. All right, now let's run the actual cracker and see what that looks like. All right, so we'll go ahead and maximize that onto the side window there. So as you can see, we can obviously open up a passwd file. It'll still be able to read our hash.txt file. It just isn't in the same format as passwd. You can also do several different other file formats, like they can do 7z, like anything that has a potential password on it, as long as you know kind of what the password format looks like, because it's different for each, file type, right, or service, right? The password format is going to look different. And in fact, I can go ahead and show you real quick before we continue on what the shadow file would look like on a Linux system, for those of you who don't already know. See, and that's what it kind of looks like. And of course, if we were to run that unshadow command and we were to put in our, let's say, password, oh yeah, got to make sure to run it as root, right? And /etc/shadow. And see how the format changed? This is the format that it would like to read, right? And as you can see, it would pretty much skip all these since there's no real password available for these. But it would try to crack mine, right? Because this jargon-looking string down here actually represents my password hash and its salt and the length and all those other different factors. So let's go ahead and... Okay, so let's go ahead and reopen our Johnny, or our John the Ripper GUI, right? Now let's go ahead and open our password file, hash.txt, and we see our hash here. Oh, okay. So it's going to have trouble actually cracking our hash because I forgot to remove the little dash that it has there in our file, right? So let's go ahead and get rid of that. We can do that easily with a simple get it. All right, open that up, get rid of that. All right, should be good to go now. All right, let's go ahead and clear, rerun our Johnny for hopefully the last time. And now let's open up our password file, hash.txt. Okay, so as you can see, it kind of recognized what our format could potentially be. We can actually narrow down the results by coming into options and actually selecting it. We know that it's a MD5, like a raw MD5 hash, right? So we can go ahead and just select raw MD5, and that'll narrow it down to trying one type. So if we launch our attack, it cracked it. Pretty fast, right? It was a very easy password to crack. It was probably in one of the word lists or rainbow tables that Johnny has pre-computed, right? And that's basically how this password cracker works. John the Ripper is built into the Kali operating system, which is what I'm running this from. So if you ever want to play around with trying to crack passwords, this is the perfect tool to do so. So let's go ahead and head back to our main content. There are various password selection methods that should be taken into consideration when formulating a secure password. User awareness is extremely important because if a user is unaware of the dangers of having a basic password, then it may be too late to help them. Their password could get exposed and cause all kinds of trouble with things like their bank accounts, social media accounts, credit card accounts, especially if they're using the same password for all those accounts. You should never use the same password for every account because if one gets hacked, they could all potentially be subsequently hacked. It is good to inform users of the importance of securing their passwords and how to secure them properly early on so that users do not suffer negative consequences from not being made aware. Computer-generated passwords are often randomly generated and are as secure as they can get. But leaving it up to the computer also produces passwords that users will have trouble remembering. In the case the user does intend to use computer-generated passwords, but is worried about forgetting the passwords, a helpful tool to use is a password manager. Password managers allow users to generate random passwords of various lengths and char sets and will autofill passwords for users in form fields. The only password the user has to remember is the one they configure to log into the password manager itself. The user still needs to ensure that the password manager's password is just as secure, if not more secure, than the passwords it manages. Because if the password manager's password were ever to be hacked, then the hacker would have full access to all the passwords stored within the password manager. Reactive password checking just involves a system periodically running its own password cracker to ensure that none of its users' passwords are guessable or crackable. This is a good implementation to ensure that a user's password remains up to date with current and recommended secure password standards and policies. A complex password policy is a password security guideline that is enforced by a system. This is also considered proactive password checking, as the system checks the password as it is being set by the user. It allows users to set their own passwords, but those passwords are only deemed allowable if they follow the standards enforced by the password policy. Otherwise, the passwords are rejected, and the users have to type in different passwords until they meet the password policy requirements. Let's go more in depth with password policy. What makes a good password policy, or rather, what makes an optimally secure password? A good password policy defines settings that determine whether a password will be secure or not. Thus, having a solid password policy is vital to the security of a system. There are two main factors involved in producing an effectively secure password: length and complexity. Length is the total number of characters that make up the password, and complexity is the variance of each character that makes up the password. For example, a password could be 14 characters long and be comprised of lowercase, uppercase, and digits, which demonstrates length and complexity respectively. Now that we understand our two factors, let's calculate the number of possible combinations. The total combinations can be calculated by raising the value of the complexity to the value of the length. From our possible combinations, we can calculate entropy, which is measured in bits. Entropy is a measurement of how unpredictable a password is. Entropy is calculated by taking the log base 2 of the number of possible combinations and is represented by a capital E. A password with a high entropy is going to take a lot longer to guess than a password with low entropy. The higher the number of possible combinations is, the higher the entropy will be. For a secure password policy, we want a password with a high minimum length, typically 14 characters or higher, that is required to use at least one character from each type of character set: lowercase, uppercase, digit, and special characters. Because that will give us a password that is highly unpredictable due to its massive number of possible combinations, which in turn gives it a massive amount of entropy. For clarification, all passwords can eventually be guessed or brute forced, but the time it takes to guess those passwords, depending on how high the entropy is, becomes infeasible due to the sheer number and randomness of the password combinations that a system would have to sift through in order to crack the real password. Let's run through a couple examples of entropy calculation. If we have a password that is 8 characters long and only consists of characters from the 26 lowercase char set, we can calculate the number of possible combinations by raising 26, the complexity, to the power of 8, the length. This gives us a total of around 209 billion possible password combinations. If we take the log base 2 of our 209 billion combinations, then we get approximately 37.60 bits. The number of bits in our entropy is fairly low in this case, so the password would be feasibly crackable within an extended period of time. Depending on how powerful the system is, it could take a few hours or a few days. The time it takes to crack a password often does heavily rely on the specs of the system that is performing the crack. The second example represents passwords 12 characters long, with characters from both uppercase and lowercase char sets, giving us 52 different characters to choose from. The third example represents passwords 14 characters long, with characters from uppercase, lowercase, and digits, giving us 62 different characters to choose from. The 68.41 and 83.36 entropies are considered to be fairly high and safe entropies. However, even though the entropies are high, character variance isn't as optimal as it could be. Ideally, you would want to include characters from all different char sets as demonstrated by the last example. The last example gives us an entropy value of 131.09 because of our long password length of 20 and all 94 readable ASCII values excluding the space character, because passwords don't usually let you use the space character. The readable ASCII characters are just all the characters with dedicated symbols that you are able to visualize on screen from typing on your keyboard. This entropy would be considered overkill as it would take several light years to crack. But that is not a bad thing. That just means you could potentially shorten the length of your password and still retain a high enough entropy. Moreover, any password with an entropy under 36 bits is considered weak and should not be used. Any entropy from 36 to 59 bits is considered reasonable for things like network and company passwords. And 60 to 127 bits is considered strong and good enough regarding things like financial information. Lastly, anything over 127 bits is considered overkill, but there is no such thing as being overly secure unless it's affecting or inhibiting the performance of the system or the user of that system. And that wraps it up for this video. We hope you will continue to indulge in the content discussed in this series. If you enjoyed the video, secure that like button and hack the subscribe button to attack the YouTube algorithm so that we can bring more content to your feed. Please feel free to give us any feedback, good or bad, we don't discriminate, in the comment section down below. And we hope to see you all again in the next video. This is Almond Milk, signing out.